Hey guys, how are we? Well, here in Pattaya, this is, I think this is Pattaya Beach. This is central Pattaya anyway. And we've just had a massive downpour, but it's the wet season here, and you'll see actually some of the stores here are, they have the sandbags, etc. Out the front of the store, and they just leave it there. So I find that a little bit odd. In the background there, I don't know if you can see that, there's a couple of massive stages set up here for music. And it is the Buddha, I think yesterday was Buddha Day, maybe Buddha weekend, I don't know. I don't understand anything about it. So anyway, they've got a 3-day music festival here, so yeah, so that's the way that it rolls. But absolutely stunning. Very nice part of the world. So yeah, interesting stuff happening with Australia at the moment. I did see an article this afternoon. A friend of mine sent me an article saying that 4 B-2 bombers were basically stationed in Queensland in Australia, and there being 4 of them, I think there's only 20 of those bombers in existence. So that's 20% of the fleet, and so that's actually quite significant in regards to the amount of bombers that are there. So certainly interesting stuff. They are in war games at the moment with the Australians, so they're basically doing a whole heap of tests, I suppose, basically on different strategies on how to invade Australia. And based on the outcomes with different strategies, they will basically garner or acquire different assets to defend Australia. But quite frankly, I think that bird has flown, excuse the pun. That really has come to a head already, and I think there's not going to be the opportunity to really protect Australia from, from the number one enemy. That's basically China. No one explicitly says it, but they always imply it. And I remember sitting down with Santo Kilman, the ex-Prime Minister of Vanuatu in, I think it was 2011 or 2010, and basically said to him, you need to work with the Australians to secure a military and air defence system here in the Pacific Islands. Otherwise, I think in a few years' time, you're going to be in real trouble. Well, 10 years, well, what's that, 12, 13 years on, probably 12 years on, they still haven't done anything. And now they're playing catch up. The Chinese have been buying strategic assets in the Asia Pacific. And, there's only, 80,000 Nivatus. And I think there's 30,000 Chinese now in Vanuatu. Don't quote me on that, but there's a massive amount of Chinese, and they've all gone there since I was there. There was only 3 Chinese families there in 2011, 2010. So they've certainly come in droves, and there's a reason for that, and they want deep sea ports. Deep sea ports, so anytime that you have a military offensive, you need to have 7 people in the supply chain to basically keep the troops on the front line active. So you need those supply chains open. And so that's why China has been basically buying up ports around the Asia Pacific and the Indian Ocean. They're trying to put in place supply chains. It's called the String of Pearls, and you can look that up for yourself. But that is very, very sinister. They say, oh, it's all about, deep sea fishing and whatever crap that they go on with. At the end of the day, there's only one reason why you need to have deep sea ports in foreign countries, and that is to create supply chains for your military. So, and I hear this crap all the time. Oh, China's not an expansionary force. They're a peaceful people. Bull crap. They have been setting up this infrastructure for decades. And I know. So I don't want to hear it. Don't put any comments in the comment below. I'm not interested. I know exactly what's going on, and I've actually written reports about it, etc. in the past. So Australia is in a very difficult position. There's two major reasons for that, and that is that Australia is an island nation. It is absolutely imperative that it has access to its shipping lanes. Without access and control of those shipping lanes, Australia is kaput. It's in serious trouble. It has no way to import or export any of its products. So, the shipping lanes are the key reason why Australia has gone to war with America every single war post World War II. And that is, Australia legitimizes America's conflicts, armed conflicts overseas, by being a participant, a willing participant. So just keep that in mind. The other one is that Australia, I think it's 22,000 kilometres of coastline. They only have, last time I looked, there was 48,200 full-time troops. I think with reservists, don't quote me on this, there was 69,500, some rough sort of equivalent of that. But really, military, front-line ready troops is only around 10,000. When you consider that China, for example, has 1.2 million troops, you sort of see that ridiculous imbalance. The other thing that sways it in the favour of Australia and its allies is that the equipment for Australian troops, US troops, is far higher quality and much better equipment with much better training than, say, the Chinese. The Chinese, I think their normal kit is only a couple of $1,000, whereas when you look at the Australians and the Americans, I think they're in some aspects $100-something thousand in kit. So they do have much better equipment, but there's certainly gaping holes, and I've been saying for years, absolute years, and I said to a friend of mine the other day, not the other day, probably 2 years ago, I said Australia is in a very difficult situation and it needs to acquire cruise missiles or long-range missiles. And the reason why is because Australia is such a vast continent that it's very difficult to hold territory. So I know the Israelis, for example, recommended to the Australians that they have an attack and retreat strategy, and they basically train and also acquire equipment for attack and retreat. And unfortunately, Australia's gone the opposite way, and they've kind of tried to integrate their equipment and technology with that of the Americans. God help Australia if the Americans decide that they can no longer afford to fight on more than one or two or three fronts, because Australia will be second and third priority for sure. Apart from Pine Gap, there's not a lot of strategic purposes for the Americans in Australia. So apart from it being obviously a strategic point within the Asia Pacific, but look, there's other places like Guam or whatever that are also very significant as well. My biggest concern is that Australia will lose territorial integrity. And I know that there was a white paper put forward for John Howard, I think in around 2000, maybe 2002, basically said that if Australia did not use its mining wealth properly, then by the year 2050, Australia could be one of the most war-torn countries on the planet, purely because of the amount of natural resources that it has. It does have a great capacity to grow food, but not a lot of food in comparison to other countries like, say, Ukraine, for example, even America or Canada. There are some other big hitters in regards to food production, but Australia has that little strip of land along the east coast that is habitable. The rest of it is just arid desert. So, look, Australia's a beautiful country, absolutely love Australia, but the government makes it absolutely impossible to live there with all of their rules and regulations and high taxes and other ridiculous things that they want to go on with. They want to control the population to the nth degree and then institute, social policies that are so far from my values that I no longer recognise the place. So, but in saying that, Australia is an absolutely beautiful country. We'll always have a heart for Australia, but it's time to actually prepare for a war with China, which is inevitable. Was 10, 12, 15 years ago, not now. It's going to take far too long for them to acquire the equipment. I did see another article on ABC, and I'll put that article in the description below, where I think it was one of the advisors to the Hawke era basically comes out and says, oh look, there's an extremely high chance, almost 100% chance, that Australia will be involved in a very intense kinetic conflict within the very near future. And we've been saying that as well for a long period of time. So Australia is in very, very, very difficult, very bad circumstances. And it has its leaders to blame. And then, you look at guys like this Daniel Andrews, who has been, sailboating around bloody China and, getting involved with the Belt and Road Initiative with the Chinese. And, all sorts of problems. I mean, this thing with Nancy Pelosi is really a storm in a teacup. There's nothing major coming of that. But you will know it when a conflict is about to erupt. And you won't know the day or the hour, but you'll have a sense of exactly where things are at. The element of surprise is always what they want in a conflict. No one is going to broadcast when they're going to invade or attack or whatever. But I will say this, expect an attack on key and strategic military assets that Australia, the US and the UK use. And that will be the beginning of that conflict. They will attack those key assets and try and take them out before they sort of try and do any sort of invasion of, say, Taiwan or anywhere else. So that's basically where I think things are at the moment. I think it's imminent. It's going to be within the next year or two, I'm fairly convinced. There's a reason why I say that, and that is because if you look at China at the moment, they have got tanks on the street, they've got massive banking problems, they've got all sorts of issues internally in regards to their finance and economics, and they've got riots on the street. You always want to have an external threat or an external conflict to solidify the sentiment of the populace internally. So you want to have the population focused on an external threat to solidify that narrative in the population. And I think that's what China is about to do if they haven't already really started to drum that up. But just wait for that to be really ramped up in the next couple of weeks and months. And the good thing that I think is in Australia's favour is that I think India is emerging as a strong military power. They've got a very stable social and economic situation. You also have an agreement with the United Kingdom and also with the United States. And that's a lot for, say, a military like China to chew, to bite off or to confront. The other thing is that you've got troops and commanders and officers, etc., that are quite used to battle in the US and the UK and Australia, whereas the Chinese have not really been actively involved in any sort of military conflict abroad, not to my knowledge anyway, not in this generation. I know they did have an invasion of Vietnam in 1967, and they've had a few recent skirmishes with India, but nothing major. No real military conflict. And the reason why I say that is it's extremely important for the military to be able to control and also use their key assets on the battlefield. And without some sort of experience, you've got all sorts of problems. It's like, you know, people saying, oh, you know, China's got an aircraft carrier, 2 aircraft carriers, maybe 3. But there's one thing with having an aircraft carrier, there's another thing on how an admiral basically uses that equipment in the field of battle. So just keep that in mind. There are a few things going in our favour, but it's really dire. And I wholeheartedly agree with the assertions of the advisor to the Hawke government. I forget his name, but he's with ANU, the Australian National University, and he's basically saying you need long-range missiles, and that's what I've been saying for a decade. You need to have long-range missiles every 500 or 1,000 kilometres apart along the Australian coastline, and you need them to be able to be, if possible, hypersonic now, because that's where the technology's gone. And if we can produce them in Australia, fantastic. And that really is the key to it, is actually producing a lot of this equipment locally. I know they've got hedgehogs and all these troop carriers and all this sort of stuff, and I just sit there and I think that's useless in the field of battle. Anyway, not that I'm a military strategist or anything, but at the end of the day, you know, you can certainly see where things are going, and you don't have to be a genius to figure that out. But I just wanted to sort of raise that with you. Look, if you haven't liked and subscribed to the channel, then do me a favour, hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll keep you posted on different things. There's a look at our little friend down here. So yeah, I'll keep you posted on things, and yeah, thanks for watching. And if you feel so inclined, go to Overseas Exiles on Facebook and join the discussion. So, but if you're in Australia, I strongly suggest that you consider relocating sooner rather than later, because time is running out. And you know, I don't know where things are going. I don't know the exact time frames, but I do know that the economic system globally is in real trouble. I do know too that you know, even with the Americans coming out and saying, what was it, the Federal Reserve? Someone was saying in America that two quarters of negative GDP growth does not equal a recession. I don't know. I think we're going to look back in a couple of decades and just shake our heads and look at these idiots and just go, what the What were you smoking? So yeah, look, the global economic situation is really dire. I think the banks will be looking at pressure testing in the next little while as well. I think there's going to be a big focus on the banks looking at their exposure to derivatives and debt. And I know Deutsche Bank a couple of years back, maybe 2 years ago, were under real pressure because they realized, hey, they're heavily exposed to derivatives and they're in a bad way. So, but I don't know where things have really developed from there. But anyway, guys, going to leave that there. And as I said, if you haven't liked and subscribed to the channel, do that. And we'll speak to you soon.